You wouldn't survive 24 hours in Cleopatra's lost city. A temple keeper's final day in the drowning harbor of Thonis-Heracleion. Good evening, dear dreamers. I am Professor Somnus, and tonight I invite you to step through the mists of time with me to a place where the Mediterranean meets the sacred Nile, where colossal statues rise from ancient harbors, and where the greatest queen in history once walked these very stones. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift back beyond the reach of our modern world, to the 4th century of the Common Era, to the magnificent port city of Thonis. Here, where the canopic branch of the Nile meets the endless blue of the Mediterranean, stands one of the ancient world's most vital trading centers. And everywhere, the gentle sounds of commerce and prayer mingle in the salt-sweet air. Massive granite statues of pharaohs rise like sleeping giants from the harbor waters. Temple spires pierce the morning mist. Tonight, you will meet Keti, an aging temple keeper who has served the temple of Amun for more years than he cares to count. His weathered hands have lit 10,000 oil lamps, carried countless jars of sacred Nile water, and swept the same marble steps that once knew the footsteps of Cleopatra herself. Yes, these same temple stones once witnessed the coronation of our greatest queen, though that was decades before Keti's time. Still, the older priests remember. They speak of her presence like a whispered prayer. But you, dear dreamer, from another age, you might imagine this sounds romantic. This life in an ancient port city. You might picture yourself walking where pharaohs walked, breathing air that carried incense and spice from every corner of the known world. Trust me when Keti tells you, you wouldn't survive 24 hours here. Not because of danger, mind you. Not because of war or plague or the anger of gods. No, you wouldn't survive because of something far more relentless than any of those, where even the simplest prayers require ceremonies that would leave you trembling with exhaustion. And wonder was built for those whose bodies knew no softness, whose hands never knew a moment's rest. You wouldn't survive because of the work, the endless, bone-deep, muscle-aching work that keeps this ancient city breathing from one sunrise to the next. So settle deeper into your rest now, and let Keti show you just one day in this place where time moves like honey, where every task demands your whole body and soul. Let him show you why this ancient world, for all its beauty. It is just before dawn now in Thonis-Heracleion. The stars still glimmer above Abukir Bay, though they grow pale as milk spilled across dark cloth. In a few moments, Keti will wake to begin another day of service in Cleopatra's lost city. And you will discover what it truly means to live when every breath, every step, every moment is work. Come then, dawn approaches, and the temple waits. As I work, the first faint glow of dawn begins to appear at the high windows, painting the stone walls with the softest hint of rose and gold. The priests whisper that when the great queen visited, she too watched this same sunrise paint the temple walls gold. Standing perhaps in this very spot, breathing this same frankincense-sweetened air, the sacred fire must be fed with fresh wood, carefully selected pieces that will burn clean and bright without excessive smoke. The constant lifting, bending, carrying, and walking on hard stone floors takes a toll that accumulates throughout the day. Already, only 2 hours into the morning routine, my lower back aches steadily. My knees feel stiff. The water that rises from its depths is clear and cold, untainted by the salt of the nearby Mediterranean. The offering tables must be arranged with mathematical precision. Loaves of bread here, exactly 3 fingers apart. Bowls of fruit there, positioned so that each one catches the morning light, just so. Flowers arranged not merely for beauty, but according to sacred patterns that honor the various aspects of the god. Every detail matters. Every placement has meaning. Every movement has meaning. Every task carries the weight of sacred responsibility. The sun has only just risen, and already my body reminds me of every one of my advancing years. Ahead lie the harbor ceremonies, the merchant negotiations, the teaching of scribes, the evening rituals, and the long night watch. Each task will demand more of these aging muscles, more of this increasingly fragile frame. There are no shortcuts, no conveniences, no machines to lighten the load. There is only the work, endless and demanding, calling for strength and endurance that your comfortable world has never required of you. There is no room for careless haste or personal preference. The gods demand perfection, and perfection requires time, attention, and physical effort that would exhaust even the strongest among you. Voices calling across the water, the creak of rope and wood as ships prepare for departure. The first merchants arguing over prices and weights. The world of Thonis-Heracleion comes alive with the dawn, and I must be ready to meet its demands. Drawing it up requires the steady turning of a heavy wooden wheel, hand over hand, arm muscles straining against the weight of the full bucket as it rises slowly from the darkness below. A silent prayer for strength to meet whatever challenges this new day may bring. And a thought, perhaps, for you, dear listener, sleeping peacefully in your soft bed, unaware of the labors that built the world your comfort rests upon. Their young voices, clear and strong, rise in the ancient melodies that have marked the dawn in this place for centuries. I join my own voice to theirs, though my throat is already dry from breathing the incense-laden air. The songs are complex, winding through modes and rhythms that must be executed flawlessly. Your voices, trained perhaps on simple melodies and supported by instruments, would crack and fail when faced with these demanding vocal traditions that must be sustained for hours at a time. Your modern arms, used to pushing buttons rather than hauling ropes, would tremble with fatigue after raising a single bucket. Yet I must fill vessel after vessel to meet the morning's needs. My robes stick to my back with perspiration. My hands are stained with oil and incense powder. My feet ache from standing on stone floors. And yet the day has barely begun. The morning service, the busiest time in the temple's daily cycle, is still ahead. The harbor is beginning to stir with activity, and soon the temple will fill with worshippers, merchants, and pilgrims, each bringing their own needs and demands, and unreliable, and my hands bear small cuts from handling rough wood and sharp-edged tools. This is merely the beginning of what promises to be another long day of physical labor. Each log must be positioned just so, creating enough airflow for proper burning, but not so much that the flames will leap too high and risk singeing the painted ceiling. The wood is heavy, and carrying armload after armload from the storage room to the altar leaves me breathing hard and sweating despite the cool morning air. They say she wept at the beauty of it, though whether from joy or sorrow, none can remember. The thought of Cleopatra here, in this place, sharing this same moment of transition from night to day, lends a peculiar dignity to even the most mundane tasks. Each large clay amphora holds enough water for a morning's worth of rituals, but when full, it weighs more than a small child. I must carry 2 at a time, one balanced on each hip, walking slowly and carefully to avoid spilling even a drop of the precious sacred water. The path to the well winds through narrow corridors and down-worn stone steps that become treacherous when wet. One stumble, one moment of inattention, and the result could be disaster. Broken vessels, spilled water, bruised bones, and the necessity of beginning the entire process again. But there is no time for prolonged reflection, for the sunrise brings new urgencies. Your modern body, soft from comfortable chairs and convenient machines, would rebel long before this point. The water vessels must be refilled next, a task that requires multiple trips to the sacred well. The well itself is a marvel of ancient engineering, a perfectly round shaft that descends 30 feet into the earth, connecting to the underground channels that bring Nile water to this sacred place. As the sun climbs higher, painting the eastern wall with increasingly bright gold, the final preparations for the morning service begin. The morning hymns begin to echo from the outer courts as the junior priests begin their own preparations. By the time the sun's disk clears the horizon, sending its first direct rays through the temple's eastern windows, I am already thoroughly tired. You, dear dreamer, who consider yourselves tired after sitting at a desk for a few hours, cannot imagine the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from this kind of physical and spiritual labor. And this is merely the first hour of the day. The great bronze doors of the temple swing open now, their hinges groaning with the effort, and the sounds of the awakening city flow in like a tide. But first, a moment's pause, a deep breath of the sweet morning air. The temple bell rings once, clear and silver in the morning air. The day's work begins in earnest now. Hour 1, pre-dawn to sunrise. The first stirrings of consciousness come not from light, but from the deep ache in my bones that serves as my truest timekeeper. My sleeping mat, woven from papyrus reeds and stuffed with dried lotus petals, has grown thin over the years, and the stone floor beneath offers no mercy to these aging joints. You, dear dreamer, who sleep on cushions softer than clouds, cannot imagine how even rest becomes a trial when your bed is little more than reeds upon stone. I make my way through the darkness to the sacred basin, carved from a single block of Aswan granite. The water within is always cold, drawn from the deepest well that connects to the sacred Nile itself. The wick must be trimmed just so, too short and it will not catch, too long and it will smoke and offend the gods. The oil must be measured carefully, for we cannot waste even a drop of the precious sacred oil that comes from far-off olive groves. My hands shake slightly as I strike the flint, not from fear, but from the bone-deep weariness that never truly leaves these old joints. The frankincense arrives in small, precious lumps from the mysterious lands of Punt, each piece worth more than a farmer earns in a month. Great Amun, Lord of the hidden name, Master of the sacred flood, accept these gifts from your humble servants. The prayers wind through dozens of verses, each one learned by heart, each one essential to the proper completion of the ritual. You, who perhaps struggle to remember a simple shopping list, cannot imagine the mental discipline required to hold hundreds of prayers, chants, and ritual procedures in perfect memory. A single mistake, a word out of place, and the entire ceremony must begin again. It must be ground fresh each morning, for yesterday's powder has lost its potency. I sprinkle it carefully onto the small bronze brazier, and immediately the air fills with sweet, resinous smoke. This means moving every piece of furniture, every offering bowl, every sacred object, to ensure that no corner remains uncleaned. The broom is made of bundled papyrus reeds, and it takes considerable force to dislodge the fine sand that blows in constantly from the surrounding desert. My back protests with each sweep, each bend to gather the collected debris. The pile of dust and sand grows steadily, testament to the relentless intrusion of the outside world into our sacred space. The scent rises toward the painted ceiling, toward the images of gods and goddesses who watch over our daily labors. Breathing deeply of the sacred smoke, I feel the familiar lightness that comes with this moment, a brief respite from the weight of physical existence. But the relief is temporary, for there is still so much work to be done before the sun rises. I take up the grinding stone, its surface worn smooth by countless mornings of this same task. The motion is rhythmic, soothing in its repetition, but also exhausting. Your soft hands would blister within minutes from the rough stone and the pressure required to reduce the resin to proper powder. Spark after spark I strike, until finally the wick catches and blooms into warm, golden light. As I cup the water in my palms and pour it over my face and hands, I touch the same golden vessels that once held perfumes for Cleopatra's coronation ceremony here, decades before my birth. These walls have witnessed 500 years of morning prayers, small cakes of barley bread baked with honey and formed into the sacred shapes, bowls of dates and figs, their sweetness attracting the occasional moth that flutters in the lamplight like a tiny spirit. Each item must be inspected, for nothing imperfect can remain before the god. Moldy bread must be removed and replaced. Wilted flowers must be cleared away. The work is endless, meticulous, and absolutely essential. These stones remember the footsteps of pharaohs and queens, of priests whose names are lost to time, of pilgrims who traveled from the edges of the known world to seek the blessings of Amun. The golden walls still bear traces of paint applied by artists who worked when the great pyramids were already ancient. You would marvel at their beauty, but you would also feel the crushing responsibility of maintaining such sacred spaces. The elder priests still speak of that day when the great queen knelt at this very basin, her hands trembling not with age as mine do, but with the weight of destiny. I rise slowly in the darkness, each movement a careful negotiation between will and flesh. Your modern hands know only warm comfort, while mine have grown accustomed to the Nile's eternal chill. 3 times I must rinse my face, 3 times my hands, 3 times I must pour the sacred water over my feet. The ritual cannot be rushed, though my fingers grow numb and my shoulders ache from bending repeatedly to the basin. Each movement must be precise, deliberate, reverent. The gods notice shortcuts, and they do not forgive them. The air is cool and heavy with moisture from the harbor, carrying the scent of wet stone and the faintest whisper of frankincense from yesterday's ceremonies. My feet find the familiar worn path across the temple floor, toes automatically avoiding the loose tile that has rattled for 3 seasons now. No oil lamp burns yet. We must conserve our precious oil for the gods, not the comfort of tired priests. The first task of every day is the ritual purification, a ceremony that must be completed before the sun's first ray touches the temple walls. You would find this cold water shocking, I think. Next comes the lighting of the dawn lamp, a task that requires more skill than you might imagine. The lamp's glow reveals the temple's inner sanctuary, and I am struck once again by the weight of history that surrounds me. I carry the lamp to the altar, walking slowly to avoid disturbing the perfect arrangement of yesterday's offerings. Dried lotus flowers, still fragrant despite their age. The incense comes next, and this is perhaps the most delicate task of the morning ritual. As I grind, I recite the morning prayers silently, the words worn smooth by repetition like stones in a riverbed. The frankincense powder, when ready, glows like captured sunlight in the lamplight. The temple floor must be swept clean of any dust or debris that accumulated during the night. The oil is indeed of lamp quality, clear and nearly odorless, worth far more than simple cooking oil. The merchant's face falls as I render my judgment, but he pays the higher tax without further argument. Such decisions require knowledge, not just of religious law, but of commerce, agriculture, and craftsmanship. A temple priest must be part scholar, part judge, part businessman. You, specialized in your modern professions, might excel in one area, but would struggle with the breadth of knowledge required for effective service here. The morning progresses, and the harbor grows busier. Dock workers strain to load heavy cargo, their muscles bulging as they maneuver amphorae and grain sacks. The air fills with dust from spilled barley and the sharp scent of various spices being transferred from ship to shore. Gulls wheel overhead, diving for scraps and adding their cries to the general cacophony of commerce. The sun climbs higher, and what began as pleasant morning warmth becomes increasingly oppressive heat. My linen robes, designed for the cool interior of the temple, prove inadequate for long hours in direct sunlight. Sweat beads on my forehead and runs down my back, mixing with the dust and incense residue to create an uncomfortable paste on my skin. You, accustomed to controlled climates and cooling systems, would find this combination of heat, physical labor, and ceremonial clothing nearly unbearable. But the morning's duties are far from over. A dispute arises between two Egyptian merchants over the ownership of a cargo of dates. Both claim to have purchased the same shipment from a farmer in Upper Egypt. The argument threatens to become violent as voices rise and hands move toward the daggers that most merchants carry for protection. I must intervene, using both legal knowledge and diplomatic skill to prevent bloodshed on the sacred dock. The resolution requires examining shipping documents, questioning witnesses, and ultimately making a judgment that will satisfy neither party completely, but will preserve the peace. Such interventions are exhausting, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of making decisions that affect people's livelihoods presses down like a physical burden. One wrong judgment, one moment of inattention or bias, and the consequences ripple outward through families and communities. You, perhaps accustomed to decisions with limited consequences, cannot imagine the stress of wielding authority where every choice carries such weight. As the morning reaches its midpoint, my energy begins to flag noticeably. The combination of early rising, physical labor, mental concentration, and increasing heat takes its inevitable toll. My hands shake slightly as I light yet another blessing fire. My voice grows hoarse from repeated recitation of prayers and arbitration of disputes. The simple act of standing upright requires increasing effort as muscles protest and joints stiffen. A young scribe approaches with the morning's tax records, tablets covered with neat rows of hieratic script recording every transaction, every blessing fee, every disputed judgment. These records must be reviewed, corrected where necessary, and prepared for transfer to the temple's main archive. The work requires close attention to detail at a time when my eyes are already tired from squinting in the bright harbor light. Numbers must be checked and rechecked. Merchant names must be spelled correctly in multiple languages. Cargo descriptions must be precise enough to prevent future disputes. Each tablet represents hours of careful work by the scribes, but the final responsibility for accuracy rests with me. An error in these records could result in everything from minor accounting discrepancies to major legal disputes between powerful trading houses. You, accustomed to computers that check your calculations and correct your spelling, cannot appreciate the mental discipline required to maintain perfect accuracy when working entirely by hand and memory. The temple bell rings the half hour before noon, its bronze voice carrying clearly across the harbor despite the noise of commerce. This signal means the morning ceremonies are nearly complete, but it also reminds me that the midday meal and rest period are still some time away. My stomach, empty since the small portion of bread I consumed before dawn, begins to rumble audibly. The scents from the harbor food stalls, grilled fish, fresh bread, dates stuffed with almonds, make my mouth water and my concentration waver. But duty requires that all morning tasks be completed before personal needs can be addressed. The final ship blessing of the morning involves a massive grain barge bound for Rome. The vessel sits low in the water, heavily laden with the wheat that feeds the eternal city's endless appetite. The captain, a tough Roman citizen with the bearing of a former soldier, shows less reverence for our Egyptian rituals than the Greek and Phoenician traders. He tolerates the blessing ceremony with obvious impatience, clearly viewing it as an annoying but necessary expense of doing business in foreign ports. Still, he pays the proper fees and waits respectfully during the prayers, recognizing that practical necessity sometimes requires accommodation to local customs. The blessing itself is more complex for such a large and valuable cargo. Additional prayers must be offered. Extra incense must be burned. The ceremonial staff must be passed completely around the vessel's perimeter, a task that requires considerable walking on the uneven harbor stones. By the time the final words are spoken and the last wisp of sacred smoke disperses in the sea breeze, my legs feel weak and unsteady. The morning's labor has pushed this aging body close to its limits, and there are still many hours of work ahead. As I gather the portable altar implements for the return journey to the temple, a moment of dizziness forces me to pause and steady myself against a wooden piling. The combination of physical exertion, heat, hunger, and dehydration creates a warning that cannot be ignored. You, with your regular meals and climate-controlled environments, your ergonomic workstations and frequent breaks, live in a world designed to minimize such physical stress. Here, in ancient Thonis-Heracleion, the human body must simply endure whatever demands the day brings, with only brief respites and basic sustenance to sustain it through long hours of demanding labor. The walk back up the stone steps to the temple level requires careful attention to placement of each foot. My legs feel unreliable, and the weight of the ceremonial implements seems to have doubled during the morning's work. Each step upward is a small victory of will over increasingly rebellious flesh. The younger priests who passed me on the stairs move with the easy confidence of bodies that have not yet learned their limitations. I remember that feeling, that sense of physical invincibility that youth provides. Now, each morning brings fresh reminders of mortality, new aches and stiffnesses that accumulate like a debt that must eventually be paid in full. But for now, there is still work to be done. The temple records must be updated. The morning's tax collection must be tallied and secured. Disputes that could not be resolved at the harbor must be scheduled for formal hearings. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the knowledge that this is only the beginning of another long day in service to gods and community. The sun stands nearly overhead now, its heat pressing down like a physical weight. The midday meal period approaches, offering the promise of food, drink, and a brief respite from labor. But even this rest will be earned through the sweat and effort of morning's work, and it will be followed by afternoon duties that will test this aging body even further. Such is the rhythm of life in Cleopatra's lost city, where every comfort must be earned through honest labor, and every day brings fresh challenges to human endurance and determination. Hour 2, morning commerce. The temple doors stand open now, and the city of Thonis-Heracleion awakens like a great beast stirring from slumber. From my position at the altar, I can hear the harbor coming alive with voices in a dozen languages. Greek merchants calling to their crews in the clipped tones of men accustomed to command. Egyptian workers singing the old songs that help them keep rhythm as they load and unload the great cargo ships. Phoenician traders arguing in their rapid, musical tongue about weights and measures and the quality of goods. The sound washes over the temple grounds like a tide, carrying with it the promise of another busy day in the greatest port city of the Mediterranean. But before I can join the bustle of commerce, there are the harbor ceremonies to perform. These morning blessings are essential to the proper functioning of our port. No ship may legally depart without the god's blessing. No cargo may be loaded without the proper rituals. The merchants know this, and they wait with varying degrees of patience for the priests to complete the necessary ceremonies. I gather the portable altar implements, a small bronze brazier, a vial of sacred oil, a handful of frankincense, and the ceremonial staff topped with the sacred eye of Horus. The walk from the temple to the main harbor is short but treacherous. The stone steps that lead down to the water level are worn smooth by countless feet and slick with morning dew. Each step must be taken carefully, for a fall while carrying sacred implements would be both painful and sacrilegious. Your modern shoes, with their rubber soles and careful engineering, would serve you better than my simple leather sandals on these ancient stones. But even with proper footwear, you would struggle with the weight of the ceremonial implements and the careful balance required to navigate these steep, narrow stairs. The harbor spreads before me like a forest of masts and rigging. Dozens of ships bob at anchor, from the great grain barges that carry wheat from the upper Nile to the sleek trading vessels that ply the routes between Egypt and the Greek islands. The old dockmaster still tells stories of the day Cleopatra's royal barge arrived, how the entire harbor fell silent except for the gentle lapping of waves against her golden prow. He describes how even the seagulls seemed to pause in their crying as the great queen stepped onto our humble dock. The memory of her presence still lends dignity to these daily routines, as if her royal approval somehow sanctifies the endless cycle of commerce and blessing. The first ship to receive blessing is a Greek vessel bound for Rhodes, her hold filled with papyrus and fine linen. The captain, a weathered man with arms like tree trunks and hands scarred by rope and wind, bows respectfully as I approach. These Greek sailors understand the importance of the gods' favor, even if they worship different deities in their home ports. I place the portable brazier on the dock and begin the intricate process of lighting the sacred fire. The morning breeze from the water makes this more challenging than the sheltered lighting within the temple. 3 times the flame gutters and dies before I can successfully establish a steady burn. My fingers, already stiff from the morning's cold water rituals, fumble with the flint and tinder, and skill required to coax flame from stone and steel when the wind fights your every effort. You, accustomed to the instant fire of your modern conveniences, cannot imagine the patience. But patience is perhaps the most essential quality of temple life. Nothing can be rushed. Everything must be done properly, completely, with full attention to detail. The frankincense goes onto the fire next, sending up its sweet smoke as an offering to Amun and the other gods who protect travelers. I recite the prayers of safe passage, calling upon the wind gods for favorable breezes and the sea gods for calm waters. The Greek captain listens respectfully, though I doubt he understands more than a few words of the ancient Egyptian liturgy. When the blessing is complete, he presses a small silver coin into my palm, payment for the temple's services. The metal is warm from his hand and bears the profile of some distant king whose name I do not know. This coin will join hundreds of others in the temple treasury, payment for the endless cycle of blessings and ceremonies that keep the port functioning. But the Greek ship is only the first of many. A Phoenician trader waits nearby, his vessel low in the water with cargo from the Lebanese coast. Cedar planks, precious purple dye, and small amphorae of the fermented fish sauce that Romans prize so highly. This captain is less patient than the Greek, tapping his foot and glancing frequently at the sky as if calculating the hours of daylight remaining for his journey. The blessing ritual must be performed completely nonetheless. No amount of impatience can justify shortcuts when dealing with the gods. As I prepare the second fire, a Phoenician trader mentions he once sold silk to Cleopatra's court. His voice carries a note of pride and longing as he describes her hands, soft as lotus petals, counting out gold coins for his finest merchandise. He claims she spoke to him in perfect Phoenician, though whether this is truth or the embellishment of an old man's memory, I cannot say. The story adds a moment of warmth to the morning's routine, a reminder that these commercial transactions connect us to the great currents of history and power. The harbor ceremonies continue ship by ship, blessing by blessing, through the morning hours. Each ritual requires the same careful attention, the same precise movements, the same lengthy prayers. My back begins to ache from bending repeatedly over the brazier. My arms grow tired from holding the ceremonial staff in the proper position. The constant standing on the hard stone dock makes my feet throb within my sandals. You, accustomed to variety and frequent rest breaks, would find this repetitive physical labor exhausting long before the morning's work is done. But there is no choice but to continue. Ships cannot wait. Merchants lose money with every hour of delay. The gods demand their due, regardless of one priest's physical discomfort. Between the ship blessings, I must also oversee the tax collection that funds the temple's operations. This is perhaps the least pleasant aspect of harbor duty. Merchants universally believe they are being overcharged. Tax collectors invariably suspect that cargo is being concealed or undervalued. Arguments break out regularly over weights and measures, over the classification of goods. over exemptions and special rates. My role is to mediate these disputes, to ensure that the gods receive their proper share, while also maintaining the commercial relationships that keep our port thriving. A Roman merchant claims his amphora of olive oil should be taxed as cooking oil, rather than the more expensive lamp oil. The difference in tax rates is significant, and the argument grows heated as each side cites precedent and regulation. I must physically examine the oil, testing its clarity and scent to determine its true quality and intended use. The merchant watches nervously as I dip a small reed into his precious cargo. His entire profit margin may hang on my decision. Teaching requires a different kind of energy than physical labor, but it is no less demanding. Each character must be demonstrated with perfect precision. Each stroke must be explained in terms of pressure, speed, and angle. Each student's attempts must be carefully examined and corrected. The work requires intense concentration, despite the afternoon heat and my body's protests from the morning's exertions. The scribes sit cross-legged on reed mats, their writing palettes balanced carefully on their knees. Each palette holds small cakes of red and black ink, made from powdered minerals mixed with water and gum. The reed pens must be cut fresh each day, their tips shaped with a sharp knife to achieve the proper line width. You, accustomed to writing implements that work consistently and require no maintenance, cannot appreciate the skill required to prepare and maintain these simple tools. The first lesson focuses on the signs used for recording grain measurements, essential knowledge for any scribe who will work in the temple's commercial operations. Each sign must be proportioned correctly, with specific relationships between the various elements that make up the complete character. The students struggle with these proportions, creating characters that are recognizable but lack the elegant precision that distinguishes professional work. I guide their hands, showing them the proper grip on the reed pen, the correct angle for holding the palette, the rhythm of breathing that helps maintain steady strokes. My own hand, despite decades of practice, now trembles slightly with fatigue, making it difficult to demonstrate the smooth, confident movements that beautiful writing requires. The afternoon heat makes the ink dry faster than usual, forcing frequent remixing and adjustments to maintain proper consistency. Sweat drips onto the writing surfaces, occasionally smearing fresh characters and requiring students to begin exercises again. The combination of physical discomfort and demanding mental work creates a challenge that tests both teacher and students. After the writing lesson comes temple maintenance, perhaps the most endless of all our daily tasks. Every surface must be cleaned regularly to prevent the accumulation of dust and debris that would offend the gods. The massive stone columns require careful washing with sacred water and soft cloths that unscratch the carved surfaces. I polish the same marble steps where legend says Cleopatra knelt to receive Amun's blessing as rightful pharaoh. The thought of her royal knees touching these same stones that now bear the weight of my aging bones adds a certain dignity to this humble labor. But dignity does not reduce the physical demands of the work. Each step must be scrubbed individually, with attention to the crevices where dirt accumulates. The cleaning cloths become heavy with absorbed water and must be wrung out repeatedly. The bucket of sacred water grows heavier with each trip back to the well for refilling. My knees, already stiff from the morning's labors, protest with sharp pains as I kneel and rise repeatedly. The stone steps are unforgiving, offering no cushioning for joints that have grown sensitive with age. You, whose cleaning tasks are simplified by modern chemicals and tools, whose surfaces are designed for easy maintenance, cannot imagine the time and effort required to maintain ancient stone structures using only water, cloth, and human labor. The afternoon inventory represents another crucial but exhausting duty. Every sacred object in the temple must be accounted for regularly. Golden vessels must be counted and their condition noted. Precious stones must be examined for damage or loose settings. Scrolls must be checked for signs of deterioration or insect damage. Among the temple's golden cups, one bears the cartouche of our last great queen, though now it's just another vessel to clean and count. The cup fits perfectly in my weathered hands, its weight substantial enough to remind me of the precious metal that forms its substance. Cleopatra's name, carved in elegant hieroglyphs around the rim, seems to whisper of power and glory that have faded into memory. Yet here it sits among dozens of other vessels, distinguished now only by the historical significance that fewer and fewer people remember or care about. The inventory requires precise record-keeping, with each item described in detail and its location carefully noted. This documentation serves both practical and legal purposes, protecting the temple's assets and ensuring that nothing disappears without proper authorization. The work demands both physical handling of heavy objects and mental attention to complex organizational systems. My aging eyes strain to read the tiny markings that identify individual pieces. My hands shake slightly as I lift and examine delicate objects worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. The responsibility weighs heavily, knowing that a moment's carelessness could result in irreparable damage to irreplaceable artifacts. As the afternoon progresses, the accumulated fatigue of the day's labors becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. My lower back aches constantly now, the pain radiating down into my hips and legs. My shoulders feel as if they carry invisible weights that grow heavier with each movement. Simple tasks that I once performed automatically now require conscious effort and frequent rest breaks. The temple's stone floors, beautiful and sacred, but utterly without mercy, make every step a small trial. Your cushioned shoes and padded surfaces, your ergonomic furniture and supportive devices represent luxuries that ancient bodies could never imagine. The preparation for evening ceremonies begins while the sun still hangs well above the horizon. Fresh oil lamps must be filled and their wicks trimmed. Incense must be ground from precious resins imported from distant lands. Offering tables must be cleared of the day's accumulated gifts and prepared for the evening's rituals. Each task, simple in itself, becomes a challenge when performed by muscles that have already given their best effort hours ago. The oil jars seem heavier than they did this morning. The grinding stone requires more pressure to achieve the same results. Even the simple act of walking from one part of the temple to another becomes a conscious effort. Yet the work must continue, for the gods do not adjust their expectations to accommodate human frailty. The evening ceremonies will begin precisely at sunset, regardless of one priest's exhaustion. The community depends on these rituals for spiritual guidance and practical blessings. There is no choice but to find the strength somewhere in this aging frame to meet the demands that duty requires. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the temple walls with golden light that reminds me of the morning's beauty. But what seemed like promise 12 hours ago now feels like an ending, a conclusion to another day of service that has tested every limit of physical and spiritual endurance. Tomorrow will bring the same demands, the same challenges, the same grinding cycle of labor that wears down human bodies like water wearing a waystone. Yet there is also satisfaction in this work, a deep sense of purpose that comes from serving something greater than oneself. The ache in my muscles is proof of honest labor. The exhaustion in my bones is evidence of duty faithfully performed. And somewhere in the midst of all this human struggle, the divine presence makes itself known through the simple act of persevering when perseverance seems impossible. The afternoon draws toward its close, but the day's work is far from finished. Evening brings its own ceremonies, its own demands, its own tests of human endurance, and I must find the strength to meet them, as I have for more years than I care to count, as I will continue to do until these aging bones can serve no longer. Such is the rhythm of life in this sacred place, where every day demands everything the human frame can give, and somehow, by grace or stubbornness or simple habit, that gift continues to be offered. The temple bell marks the approaching sunset, calling the faithful to prepare for evening prayers. My body protests at the thought of more standing, more lifting, more of the endless physical demands that sacred service requires. But duty calls, and duty must be answered, regardless of the cost in comfort or ease. The gods are waiting, and the gods must not be kept waiting. Part 3. Afternoon duties. The midday meal, when it finally comes, is both salvation and cruel reminder of how little sustenance our lives truly provide. A simple bowl of barley porridge, sweetened with dates and enriched with a small portion of goat's milk, a piece of coarse bread, still warm from the temple ovens, with a thin smear of olive oil and a sprinkle of salt, a handful of figs, their sweetness a brief luxury in the midst of endless labor, and water, blessed and cool, drawn from the sacred well that connects our temple to the life-giving Nile. You, accustomed to abundant meals and endless variety, might find this fare meager and unsatisfying. But after the morning's exhausting work, each bite tastes like a gift from the gods themselves. The bread tears easily between teeth that have grown loose with age, releasing the nutty flavor of grain that grew in Nile mud. The figs burst with concentrated sweetness, their tiny seeds providing a satisfying crunch. Even the simple porridge, thick enough to eat with fingers, provides the deep satisfaction that comes only when the body truly needs fuel. The meal is consumed in relative silence, as is proper during the midday rest period. Conversation requires energy that is better conserved for the afternoon's duties. The other priests eat with the focused attention of men who understand that food is fuel, not entertainment. Each bite is chewed thoroughly, savored not for pleasure, but for the practical necessity of extracting every bit of nourishment from our limited provisions. Your hurried modern meals, consumed while distracted by screens and obligations, waste both food and the opportunity for the deep restoration that mindful eating provides. The rest period lasts exactly 1 hour, timed by the shadow of the great sundial in the temple's central courtyard. Some of the younger priests use this time for sleep, curling up on reed mats in whatever shade they can find. But sleep eludes me now, as it often does in these advancing years. Instead, I sit quietly in the small garden where medicinal herbs grow in neat rows between the temple buildings. The scent of growing things, of earth and green leaves, provides a moment of peace in the day's relentless rhythm. A small lizard basks on a sun-warmed stone, its tiny chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. Even this simple creature works harder for its survival than you can imagine, constantly alert for threats, constantly searching for food, constantly balancing the need for warmth against the danger of exposure. The afternoon duties begin with the sacred boat ceremony, one of the most physically demanding rituals in our daily cycle. The ceremonial barge of Amun must be carried from its shrine to the harbor and back, a journey that requires the coordinated effort of 12 priests. The boat itself is a masterwork of ancient craftsmanship, carved from a single cedar trunk and covered with gold leaf that catches the sunlight like captured fire. But beauty comes at a cost in weight and unwieldiness. The vessel, though only 12 feet long, weighs more than 4 grown men. Carrying it requires perfect coordination, absolute attention to foot placement, and strength that must be sustained for the entire processional route. You, whose heaviest lifting might involve grocery bags or luggage, cannot comprehend the physical challenge of maneuvering such a burden through narrow temple corridors and down stone steps made treacherous by centuries of wear. The carrying poles, worn smooth by countless hands, dig into shoulders and create pressure points that will ache for hours after the ceremony ends. My position is at the front left pole, a place of honor that reflects my seniority, but also places the greatest navigational responsibility on my aging eyes and uncertain reflexes. One stumble, one moment of inattention, and the sacred vessel could crash to the stones, destroying irreplaceable artwork and potentially injuring several priests. The procession moves slowly, step by careful step, through the temple complex toward the harbor. Each doorway requires precise maneuvering to avoid scraping the boat's golden sides against stone frames. Each step down requires perfect timing to prevent the rear carriers from being overwhelmed by shifting weight. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly, making the gold leaf almost too bright to look at directly. Sweat runs freely down my face and back, making the carrying pole slippery in my grip. My shoulders burn with the sustained effort, and my legs tremble with the combination of weight and careful movement required. The younger priests at the rear poles breathe heavily, but show no signs of the struggle that threatens to overwhelm my aging frame. You, accustomed to machines that bear your burdens and transport your goods, live in a world where human muscle has been largely freed from such demands. Here, in ancient Thonis-Heracleion, every task requires the full engagement of human strength and endurance. The boat ceremony concludes at the harbor's edge, where prayers are offered for the prosperity of all who make their living from the sea. The return journey to the temple shrine proves even more challenging, as tired muscles must now navigate the upward path while maintaining the same precision and coordination. By the time the sacred vessel is safely returned to its resting place, my entire body shakes with exhaustion. Dark spots dance at the edges of my vision, and I must lean against a pillar to prevent collapse. The younger priests disperse to their various duties, seemingly unaffected by the ordeal that has left me gasping and trembling. Age, it seems, is the great equalizer, reducing even the most dedicated servant to a reminder of mortality's inevitable approach. But there is no time for recovery, for the afternoon teaching session awaits. 3 young scribes have come to learn the complex art of hieratic writing, the cursive script that makes temple record-keeping possible. Part 4. Evening Rituals. 6:0 p.m. 11:0 p.m. The sun hangs low over the western desert now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that would take your breath away if you had any breath left to lose. But beauty, however magnificent, cannot restore strength to muscles that have labored since before dawn. The evening ceremonies represent the day's most sacred time, when the god Amun must be properly honored as he prepares for his nightly journey through the underworld. These rituals cannot be shortened or simplified, regardless of human exhaustion. The gods demand perfection, especially at sunset when the boundary between day and night makes the spiritual world most accessible to mortal prayers. I gather the evening implements with hands that shake slightly from the day's accumulated fatigue. The ceremonial sistrum, its bronze discs designed to create the sacred sounds that please the gods. The golden libation bowl, polished to mirror brightness and heavy enough to require both hands for proper handling. Fresh lotus flowers, their petals still damp with Nile water, arranged in precise patterns that honor the various aspects of the divine. Each item must be carried with reverence and positioned with mathematical precision according to traditions that stretch back beyond memory. You, whose evening relaxation begins the moment work ends, cannot imagine approaching the day's most demanding ceremonies when energy reserves have already been depleted by hours of physical labor. The evening hymns are the same ones sung when Cleopatra ruled, melodies that drift across the water like fading memories of a time when Egypt commanded the respect of the world. These ancient songs require vocal techniques that push already tired voices beyond their comfortable limits. The melodies climb and descend through intervals that must be executed flawlessly, with breath control that becomes increasingly difficult as the day's exertions take their toll. My throat, dry from hours of speaking prayers and mediating disputes, feels rough and unreliable. The notes that once flowed effortlessly now require conscious effort and careful breath management. Yet the hymns must be sung, for they carry prayers and praises that connect our earthly temple to the eternal realm, where the gods dwell. The younger priests join their voices to mine, their clear tones helping to mask the warble that age and exhaustion bring to my own singing. Together we create the sacred harmonies that have marked sunset in this place for 5 centuries. The music rises toward the painted ceiling, toward the images of gods and goddesses who watch over our daily struggles with infinite patience and compassion. The first libation ceremony requires precise movements that become increasingly difficult as tired muscles rebel against demands for continued performance. The golden bowl must be lifted high above the altar, held steady while prayers are recited, then lowered slowly to pour sacred water in a perfect stream onto the offering stone. My arms, already pushed beyond their limits by the day's lifting and carrying, tremble with the effort of maintaining proper form. The bowl, filled with blessed Nile water, weighs more than it should, its golden substance seeming to absorb the accumulated exhaustion of hours spent in sacred service. One tremor, one moment of muscle failure, and the entire ceremony must begin again. The gods notice imperfection, and they do not forgive carelessness born of human weakness. Yet somehow, through will or divine assistance, the libation flows smoothly onto the altar stone, creating the sacred patterns that mark proper completion of the ritual. The incense ceremonies grow more complex as evening progresses, requiring multiple types of precious resins burned in specific sequences. Frankincense from the mysterious lands of Punt, its sweet smoke rising like visible prayers. Myrrh from Ethiopian hills, its bitter scent believed to drive away evil spirits that become more active as darkness approaches. Sacred Kiphi, the most precious incense of all, made from 16 different ingredients that must be prepared according to secret formulas known only to the highest-ranking priests. Each type requires its own prayers, its own specific handling procedures, its own careful timing in relation to the sun's position in the western sky. The grinding of fresh incense pushes already tired arms to their limits. The stone pestle seems to grow heavier with each stroke, requiring increasing pressure to reduce the hard resins to powder fine enough for proper burning. My shoulders, stiff from the morning's boat ceremony, protest with sharp pains that radiate down my arms and into my hands. The work that seemed routine this morning now demands conscious effort and frequent rest breaks to prevent complete muscle failure. You, whose physical demands rarely extend beyond pressing buttons and lifting lightweight objects, cannot comprehend the cumulative effect of 12 hours spent in constant manual labor. The evening meal, when it finally comes, provides another brief respite, but also highlights how little nourishment sustains this demanding life. A bowl of lentil stew, thick with onions and flavored with precious cumin. Bread that has cooled since the morning baking, now tough enough to require careful chewing. A piece of dried fish, salty and strong, providing protein that tired muscles desperately need. And always water blessed at the sacred well, cool and pure, but never quite enough to satisfy the thirst that accumulates during long hours in the desert heat. An elder shares how Cleopatra once dined here on honey cakes and Nile fish, just as we do now, though her table gleamed with silver, we'll never see. His weathered voice carries a note of wonder as he describes the great queen's visit, how she insisted on eating the same simple fare as the temple priests rather than demanding elaborate royal banquet. The story makes our humble meals seem more dignified, as if sharing the same basic food somehow connects us across the decades to that legendary figure. Yet even this connection to history cannot add calories to our sparse provisions or rest to our weary bones. The food disappears quickly, consumed by bodies that know hunger as a constant companion. Every grain of barley, every drop of oil, every fragment of dried fruit represents precious resources that must be carefully rationed to last until the next supply shipment arrives. You, accustomed to abundance and variety, to meals eaten for pleasure rather than pure necessity, live in a world where food is entertainment rather than simple fuel for survival. The community dinner conversation, what little there is, focuses on practical matters rather than the casual topics that might occupy your evening discussions. Which merchant ships are expected tomorrow, and what goods they might carry. Whether the Nile flood predictions suggest a good harvest or potential shortages. How the Roman tax collectors have been treating other temples along the river. Every topic relates directly to survival, to the endless challenge of maintaining this sacred community in a world that grows more difficult with each passing year. There is no energy for idle chatter, no mental space for topics that do not bear directly on the practical necessities of daily existence. Even laughter, when it comes, carries an edge of exhaustion that speaks to the deep fatigue that underlies every moment of temple life. The evening teaching session represents perhaps the most challenging duty of all, requiring mental clarity and vocal strength when both are in short supply. Merchant families send their sons to learn basic mathematics and record keeping, skills essential for success in Thonis-Heracleion's commercial environment. These young men, well-fed and energetic, arrive for instruction, just as my own energy reaches its lowest ebb. They expect clear explanations, patient correction of errors, and demonstrations of complex calculations that require precision despite trembling hands and tired eyes. The evening lamplight, flickering and dim compared to your electric illumination, makes the already challenging task of reading and writing even more difficult. Numbers blur together on papyrus surfaces that seem to shift and waver in the uncertain light. My voice, hoarse from a day of prayers, and ceremonies, cracks and fails when trying to project clearly enough for students seated at the back of the instruction room. The young merchants, though respectful, show signs of impatience when explanations must be repeated due to unclear speech, or demonstrations that must be started over when tired hands make errors. You, whose teaching tools include bright lighting, clear visual aids, and voices supported by electronic amplification, cannot imagine trying to convey complex information under such challenging conditions. Yet the instruction must continue, for these young men represent the future of our commercial community. Their success or failure in mastering these essential skills will determine not only their own prosperity, but the continued economic vitality that supports the temple's operations. Every error I fail to correct, every concept I explain inadequately, could result in future losses that affect not just individual families, but the entire religious and commercial network that keeps our city functioning. The weight of this responsibility presses down like a physical burden, adding mental stress to the already overwhelming physical exhaustion. The security rounds begin as full darkness settles over the temple complex. Every building must be checked for signs of intrusion or damage. Every gate must be tested to ensure proper locking. Every lamp must be inspected to verify adequate oil supplies for the night watch. The rounds require walking the entire perimeter of the temple grounds, a distance that would challenge fresh legs but becomes a genuine ordeal for muscles that have already given their best effort. The stone pathways, uneven and sometimes treacherous even in daylight, become genuinely dangerous in the flickering light of handheld oil lamps. One misstep, one moment of inattention born of exhaustion, could result in a fall that might end not just my evening duties, but my entire career as a temple priest. Yet the rounds cannot be shortened or simplified, for temple security affects not only the physical safety of our sacred spaces, but the community's confidence in our ability to protect the valuable goods and sacred objects entrusted to our care. Each building reveals the accumulated evidence of another busy day. Dust that has settled on surfaces cleaned just this morning. Oil lamps that have burned low and need refilling. Offering tables that require clearing and preparation for tomorrow's ceremonies. The endless cycle of maintenance and preparation that makes temple life possible continues even as darkness falls, demanding attention from bodies that have already given everything they have to give. The personal prayer time, when it finally comes, offers both spiritual comfort and physical relief. Kneeling before the small shrine in my private quarters, I can finally allow my tired body to find a moment of rest. The prayers themselves have become as automatic as breathing after decades of repetition. Words of gratitude for another day of service successfully completed. Requests for strength to meet tomorrow's challenges. Acknowledgement of human frailty and dependence on divine assistance. But even prayer requires effort when exhaustion has drained every reserve of energy. My knees, pressed against the hard stone floor, send sharp signals of protest that make concentration difficult. My voice, reduced to a whisper by hours of use, can barely form the words that should rise with conviction toward the listening gods. The oil lamp that illuminates my shrine flickers and wavers, casting, dancing shadows that make the painted images seem to move and shift with a life of their own. Yet in this moment of quiet communion, despite the physical discomfort and bone-deep weariness, there comes a sense of peace that makes all the day's struggles worthwhile. The knowledge that duty has been faithfully performed, that the gods have been properly honored, that the community has been served according to ancient traditions. This satisfaction runs deeper than physical comfort, providing a foundation of meaning that sustains the spirit even when the body reaches its limits. You, whose evening relaxation might include various entertainments and diversions, cannot understand the profound rest that comes from simple completion of necessary work. The night watch preparation represents the final task in a day that began before dawn and has continued without significant rest. Fresh oil must be measured into the lamps that will burn through the darkness. Sacred texts must be arranged for the nighttime copying that helps preserve our ancient wisdom. The eternal flame must be fed with wood that will burn clean and steady until morning. Each task, routine in itself, becomes a supreme effort when performed by a body that has already exceeded every reasonable limit. The lamp oil seems heavier than it did this morning, though the containers remain the same. The wood for the eternal flame requires multiple trips from the storage room, each load testing muscles that threaten to cramp and fail. Even the simple act of arranging scrolls demands careful attention from eyes that want nothing more than to close and seek the oblivion of sleep. But sleep, when it finally comes, will be brief and far from restful. The night watch duties will begin in just a few hours, requiring vigilance and alertness from a body that has already given everything it has to give. Tomorrow will bring the same cycle of demands, the same tests of endurance, the same grinding challenge of maintaining sacred traditions in a world that seems designed to break the human frame. Yet somehow, through grace or stubbornness or simple habit, the cycle continues. Each day ends with the knowledge that duty has been performed, that the gods have been honored, that the community has been served. And each night falls with the hope that somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, tomorrow's strength will be sufficient for tomorrow's demands. The darkness settles over Thonis-Heracleion like a blessing, bringing relief from the heat and glare that have tormented tired eyes all day. In the distance, the harbor grows quiet as ships secure themselves for the night, and merchants settle into whatever rest this demanding life allows. The eternal flame flickers steadily in its sacred brazier, a symbol of divine presence that continues even when human strength fails. And I prepare to begin the long night watch, the final test of endurance in a day that has already tested every limit of human capability. The gods are patient, but they are also demanding. The night ahead will require everything this aging body can give, and perhaps a bit more than that. But duty calls, as it always does, and duty must be answered. The darkness waits, and I must meet it as I have for so many years before. Part 5, Night Watch, 11:0 p.m., 4:0 m. The temple settles into its nighttime rhythm as the last sounds of the city fade into the darkness beyond our walls. What little conversation there was during the evening meal has given way to the profound silence that marks the transition from day into night. The younger priests have already sought their sleeping mats, their bodies still capable of the deep rest that eludes those of us whose bones ache with the accumulated weight of years. But for the senior priests, the night brings not rest, but the most demanding duty of all, the sacred vigil that ensures the gods are never left unattended. The night watch is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of temple life, appearing to outsiders as a peaceful time of quiet contemplation. You might imagine it as a restful interlude, a chance to sit quietly and recover from the day's labors. But the reality is far different, far more demanding than any daytime duty. The darkness brings its own challenges, its own tests of human endurance and spiritual discipline. Every shadow might conceal a threat to the temple's security. Every sound might signal the approach of thieves drawn by rumors of golden treasures. Every flicker of the eternal flame might indicate the beginning of a catastrophe that could destroy centuries of accumulated sacred objects. The night watch requires constant vigilance from a body that has already given everything it has to give during the preceding 18 hours. I begin my rounds through the temple complex, carrying a small oil lamp that casts a circle of wavering light in the profound darkness. The familiar pathways that I navigate easily during daylight become treacherous obstacles in the uncertain illumination. Stone blocks that seemed perfectly level this morning now reveal tiny irregularities that catch at tired feet. Doorways that posed no challenge during the day now require careful attention to avoid collision with their shadowy frames. My legs, already unsteady from exhaustion, must now contend with the added challenge of navigating by lamplight while maintaining the alertness necessary for effective security. The first building to check is the main sanctuary, where the most precious objects rest in their sacred niches. Golden vessels catch and reflect my lamp's flame, creating points of brilliant light that dance and flicker like captured stars. Each piece must be visually confirmed as present and undisturbed, a task that requires close examination despite eyes that burn with fatigue. The carved reliefs on the walls seem to move and shift in the wavering lamplight, creating an illusion of animation that makes concentration even more difficult. My tired mind, stressed by exhaustion and the eerie effects of shadows and flame, begins to play tricks that must be constantly corrected through conscious effort. You, whose nighttime environment is controlled by reliable electric lighting, cannot imagine the psychological challenge of working in darkness, broken only by the uncertain glow of oil flames. The sounds of night create their own demands on attention, already stretched thin by the day's labors. The distant call of night birds from the harbor marshes, the gentle lapping of water against the temple's foundation stones, the soft whisper of wind through the reed screens that provide privacy for the sleeping quarters. Each sound might be innocent, or it might mask the approach of danger. The night watchman must learn to distinguish between the normal sounds of night and the subtle variations that might indicate human intrusion. This requires a level of auditory attention that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as exhaustion clouds the senses and makes concentration a supreme effort of will. The checking of doors and gates represents a physical challenge that pushes tired muscles beyond any reasonable limit. Each barrier must be tested to ensure proper security, requiring the application of force sufficient to verify that locks and bars are functioning correctly. The great bronze doors of the main entrance weigh more than several men, and testing their security requires strength that must be summoned from reserves that were depleted hours ago. My shoulders, already stiff and painful from the day's lifting and carrying, protest with sharp spasms as I apply the necessary pressure to confirm that all barriers are properly secured. The smaller gates present their own challenges, often sticking in their frames and requiring multiple attempts to open and close properly. Each gate that resists must be examined closely to determine whether the resistance indicates normal wear or possible tampering by would-be intruders. The midnight hour brings its own particular duties, including the checking of sleeping quarters to ensure the safety and well-being of the temple community. This requires moving through areas where others are trying to rest, demanding the ability to walk silently despite exhaustion that makes every step uncertain. The younger priests sleep deeply, their breathing regular and peaceful in the way that only youth and clear conscience can provide. But even in sleep, they must be protected from the dangers that darkness might bring. Each sleeping area must be examined for signs of intrusion or disturbance, work that requires moving carefully through spaces filled with sleeping bodies and personal possessions. One careless step, one moment of inattention born of fatigue, could awaken the entire community and destroy the rest that tomorrow's duties will require. The skill needed to move silently through crowded spaces while carrying a flickering oil lamp represents yet another demand on coordination and attention that are already stretched to their breaking point. You, whose nighttime movement is aided by reliable lighting and clear pathways, cannot appreciate the concentration required to navigate complex spaces in near total darkness while maintaining absolute silence. In the darkness, I imagine Cleopatra's ghost still walking these corridors, checking on the kingdom she could never quite save from Rome's hunger. The great queen's presence seems almost tangible in the deep silence of night, as if her spirit continues the endless rounds of responsibility that consumed her mortal life. Perhaps she too knew this bone-deep exhaustion, this grinding cycle of duty that continues regardless of human frailty. Perhaps she too felt the weight of protecting so many people, maintaining so many traditions, meeting so many demands that seemed to exceed any reasonable human capacity. The thought of her invisible presence provides a strange comfort, the sense that even in these dark hours of greatest challenge, I am not truly alone in bearing the burdens that sacred duty requires. Her ghostly footsteps seem to echo alongside mine, as I continue the rounds that ensure this ancient community's survival through another night. The copying of sacred texts represents the night watch's most intellectually demanding duty, requiring mental clarity and precise hand coordination when both are in desperately short supply. The preservation of ancient wisdom cannot wait for convenient daylight hours or well-rested scribes. The work must continue through the night, adding new copies to replace scrolls that age and deteriorate, despite our best efforts at preservation. The texts themselves, written in hieratic script that requires perfect execution, demand attention to detail that becomes increasingly difficult as the night progresses. Each character must be formed with mathematical precision, maintaining the exact proportions and spacing that distinguish professional work from amateur attempts. My hand, steady enough this morning despite advancing age, now trembles visibly from exhaustion and the effects of holding writing implements for extended periods. The reed pen seems impossibly heavy, requiring conscious effort to maintain proper grip and control. The papyrus surface, smooth and receptive in good light, becomes difficult to see clearly in the wavering illumination of oil lamps. Characters that should flow smoothly from practiced fingers now require multiple attempts to achieve acceptable quality. Each error means starting over, wasting precious papyrus and lamp oil while adding time to tasks that must be completed before dawn. You, whose writing is aided by reliable instruments and consistent lighting, whose errors can be easily corrected without starting over, cannot comprehend the challenge of producing perfect work under such demanding conditions. The maintenance of the eternal flame represents perhaps the most critical responsibility of the night watch. This sacred fire must never be allowed to die, for its extinguishing would signal divine displeasure and bring catastrophe upon the entire community. The flame requires constant attention throughout the night, with fresh wood added at regular intervals to maintain steady burning. But the wood must be selected carefully, choosing pieces that will burn cleanly without excessive smoke or dangerous sparking. Each log must be positioned precisely to maintain proper airflow while preventing the fire from growing too large and risking damage to the surrounding temple structure. My tired eyes, strained from hours of close work in uncertain light, struggle to judge the flame's condition accurately. The colors that indicate proper burning become difficult to distinguish when exhaustion affects visual perception. The sounds that signal the need for additional fuel blend with the general background noise of night, requiring concentrated listening when attention has already been stretched beyond comfortable limits. One moment of inattention, one error in judgment, born of fatigue, could result in the catastrophe that the entire night watch is designed to prevent. The responsibility weighs heavily, adding mental stress to the already overwhelming physical demands of nocturnal duty. As the night progresses toward its deepest point, the accumulated effects of 20 hours of continuous labor begin to create genuine dangers. My legs, unsteady from exhaustion, threaten to buckle without warning during the security rounds. My hands shake so severely that carrying oil lamps becomes a genuine risk, with the constant possibility of dropping burning oil and creating the very fire hazard that vigilance is meant to prevent. My eyes, dry and strained from squinting in uncertain light, begin to see movement and shapes that may or may not be real. The boundary between actual perception and exhaustion-induced hallucination becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Yet the duties cannot be reduced or simplified, for the safety of the entire community depends on maintaining full vigilance throughout the darkest hours. The gods do not adjust their expectations to accommodate human weakness, and the dangers that threaten sacred spaces do not pause out of consideration for tired watchmen. You, whose night rest is protected by others and whose sleep is undisturbed by responsibility for communal safety, cannot imagine the weight of being the sole guardian of so many lives and so much irreplaceable treasure. The pre-dawn hours bring their own particular challenges as the body's natural rhythms reach their lowest point. This is when sleep feels most necessary and consciousness becomes most difficult to maintain. The temptation to rest, even briefly, becomes almost overwhelming as every muscle screams for relief and every joint aches with accumulated strain. But sleep during the night watch is not merely forbidden, it is potentially catastrophic. The few minutes of inattention that rest would require could be the exact moment when danger approaches. The brief unconsciousness that exhausted bodies crave could be when thieves make their move, or when careless sparks from the eternal flame find combustible material. The discipline required to maintain alertness when every fiber of being demands rest represents perhaps the ultimate test of spiritual dedication. It requires drawing on reserves that seem not to exist, finding strength in commitment that transcends physical capability. The copying work becomes increasingly difficult as the night reaches its deepest point. Characters that began the evening with clean, precise lines now waver and blur as tired hands lose their steadiness. The ink, mixed fresh at sunset, begins to thicken and change consistency as the night air affects its composition. The papyrus, initially smooth and receptive, becomes more challenging to work with as humidity from the harbor affects its surface texture. What should be mechanical, automatic work now requires conscious concentration for every stroke of the pen. Each line must be considered carefully, planned in advance, executed with deliberate precision despite hands that shake and eyes that struggle to focus. The mental effort required to maintain quality standards when physical capabilities have been exhausted adds another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. Yet the work must continue, for tomorrow's temple operations depend on having accurate records and preserved texts available when needed. There is no choice but to persevere, to find somehow the strength and attention necessary to meet standards that cannot be compromised. The security rounds during the deepest night hours require navigating the temple complex when darkness is most complete and vision most impaired. The small oil lamp that provides illumination seems increasingly inadequate as tired eyes struggle to process visual information accurately. Shadows that appeared merely dark earlier in the evening now seem to move and shift with threatening intent. Normal sounds take on sinister qualities that require conscious effort to interpret correctly. The fatigue that has accumulated throughout the day now affects judgment and perception in ways that create genuine safety hazards. A stumble that might have been merely embarrassing during daylight could result in serious injury when it occurs on stone steps slick with night moisture. A momentary confusion about location that would be easily corrected in familiar surroundings becomes genuinely dangerous when it happens while carrying open flame through areas filled with combustible materials. Yet the rounds must continue with the same thoroughness and attention to detail that they received when the watch began hours ago. The community's safety depends on maintaining full vigilance, regardless of personal comfort or capability. As I light the dawn lamp, I wonder if Cleopatra ever stood here at this same hour, watching over her people as I do now. The great queen, for all her royal privilege and legendary beauty, must have known this same bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying responsibility for others. Perhaps she too experienced the profound fatigue that accumulates when duty demands more than the human frame seems capable of giving. Perhaps she too found herself functioning on will alone when physical strength had long since been exhausted. The thought of her sharing this experience, of standing in this same spot during her own darkest hours, provides a strange comfort as the night watch finally draws toward its close. Her ghostly presence seems to offer encouragement, the sense that even the greatest figures of history understood the grinding cost of leadership and service. The approaching dawn brings not relief but the knowledge that another full day of demanding labor lies ahead. The night watch ends only to begin the morning purification rituals that will start the cycle over again. There will be no rest, no recovery time, no opportunity to restore the energy that has been completely depleted during the long dark hours. The aging body that has given everything it has to give must somehow find reserves for another 18 hours of physical and spiritual service. Yet somehow, through grace or stubbornness or simple habit, the strength appears when it is needed. The dawn light begins to filter through the high windows, painting the temple walls with the same golden glow that marked yesterday's beginning. Another night of vigilance has been successfully completed. Another day of service is about to begin, and I must find the courage to meet whatever challenges the new day will bring, just as I have for more years than I care to count. The gods are patient, but they are also demanding, and duty, once accepted, must be fulfilled regardless of the cost in comfort or ease. The eternal flame burns steady and bright, a symbol of persistence that continues even when human strength fails. And I prepare to begin another day in service to traditions older than memory, stronger than individual frailty, more enduring than any single life. Part 6, Conclusion, The Drowning City, Final 30 minutes. The first pale light of dawn touches the eastern windows of the temple, and I realize with a start that another full cycle has begun. 24 hours have passed since I last stood in this exact spot, preparing for another day of service to gods and community. My body, pushed beyond every reasonable limit, somehow continues to function through will and habit when strength has long since been exhausted. The purification rituals must begin again, the same cold water and sacred vessels, the same precise movements that have marked the beginning of each day for more years than I can easily count. As I light the dawn lamp, I wonder if Cleopatra ever stood here at this same hour, watching over her people as I do now, feeling the weight of responsibility that seems to grow heavier with each passing year. Perhaps she too knew this profound exhaustion that comes from serving something greater than oneself, this grinding cycle of duty that continues regardless of human frailty or the passage of time. The great queen's presence seems to linger in these ancient stones, a reminder that even the most powerful figures in history understood the cost of leadership and the burden of caring for others. Her golden cup still sits among the temple treasures, bearing witness to a time when Egypt commanded the respect of the world, and this port city thrived as the crossroads of Mediterranean commerce. But time, like the rising waters of the harbor, changes everything it touches, wearing away even the strongest foundations with its relentless pressure. You, dear dreamer, have witnessed just one day in the life of ancient Thonis-Heracleion, one cycle of the demanding labor that built and maintained this remarkable civilization. The physical challenges that would defeat your modern bodies in a matter of hours were simply the baseline of existence for those who called this sacred city home. Every task required strength, endurance, and skill that your comfortable world has made unnecessary and largely impossible. Every meal was earned through honest sweat, every comfort purchased with genuine labor, every moment of rest a precious respite from demands that never truly ceased. The merchants who argued over taxes and weights, the scribes who copied sacred texts through the long night hours, the priests who maintained the eternal flame regardless of exhaustion or weather, the dock workers who loaded ships with their own muscle and bone. All of them lived lives of such physical intensity that even their rest was a form of work, a deliberate effort to restore bodies pushed constantly to their limits. But even as I prepare for another day of this relentless cycle, time itself is preparing changes that none of us can foresee or prevent. The waters of Abu Qir Bay, so gentle this morning as they lap against our harbor stones, carry within them the seeds of destruction that will eventually claim everything we have built. The earth beneath our feet, solid and reliable for so many centuries, grows less stable with each passing year as underground forces shift and change in ways our ancient science cannot predict or control. The great statues that guard our harbor, carved from granite that seemed eternal, will one day topple into waters that rise higher than any flood in recorded memory. The temple, where I have served so faithfully, these stone walls that have witnessed coronations and prayers and the daily struggles of countless faithful servants, will sink beneath waves that recognize no human authority or divine protection. The scrolls I copied so carefully through the night, the sacred texts that preserve wisdom accumulated over millennia, will rest on the sea floor where only fish will read their hieroglyphic wisdom. The golden vessels that caught and reflected lamp flame, the precious objects that connected us to our most sacred traditions, will lie buried in mud and sand where their beauty serves only to puzzle future generations of explorers. Yet there is strange comfort in this knowledge of eventual dissolution. The work we do, the struggles we endure, the daily cycle of service and sacrifice, all of it serves purposes larger than our individual understanding. The traditions we maintain with such careful attention will survive even when the city that housed them has been swallowed by the sea. The wisdom we preserve through long hours of copying and teaching will find new homes in distant places where scholars will puzzle over our dedication and marvel at our precision. The spiritual disciplines that demand so much of these aging bodies will continue to shape human souls long after the last priest has completed his final rounds. Even the physical hardships that seem so overwhelming, the endless cycle of labor that breaks down human frames with such relentless efficiency, serve to demonstrate the remarkable capacity of human beings to endure and persist in service of higher purposes. You, comfortable in your modern ease, may look upon our struggles with pity or incomprehension, but perhaps there is wisdom in this ancient way of life that your world has lost in its rush toward convenience and comfort. Perhaps the connection between effort and reward, between sacrifice and meaning, between physical struggle and spiritual growth, creates a depth of existence that no amount of technological progress can replace. The merchants gathering in the harbor for another day of commerce carry forward traditions of trade and negotiation that will spread throughout the known world. The young scribes learning their letters in temple schools will take their skills to distant cities where Egyptian wisdom will influence cultures not yet imagined. The pilgrims who journey here for blessings and healing will return to their homes carrying memories and practices that will enrich spiritual life across the Mediterranean world. Even when the city itself disappears beneath the waves, its influence will continue to ripple outward through time like circles spreading from a stone dropped in still water. The Roman tax collectors who seem so threatening today will themselves become subjects of future conquerors. The Greek merchants who dominate our harbor will see their own cities rise and fall as the wheel of history turns through its endless cycles. The Phoenician traders who bring exotic goods from distant shores will watch their maritime empire fragment and dissolve as new powers emerge to challenge their ancient dominance. But the quiet work of preservation, the daily discipline of maintaining sacred traditions, the grinding labor of keeping civilization functioning one day at a time, this will continue regardless of which empire claims authority or which merchants control the most profitable trade routes. The harbor grows busy now with the sounds of another morning's commerce, the same voices and activities that have marked dawn in this place for centuries uncounted. Ships preparing for departure, their crews making final preparations for journeys that will test human courage against the infinite dangers of the sea. Merchants examining cargo one last time, calculating profits and losses that will determine the prosperity of families and communities. Dock workers beginning another day of backbreaking labor, moving goods with no tools beyond human muscle and simple rope and wood. All of them participants in the great dance of civilization, each playing a small but essential role in the complex web of relationships that makes urban life possible. Yet beneath their feet, water seeps slowly into foundations that have stood firm for so many generations. The sea level rises imperceptibly, year by year, decade by decade, century by century, claiming inch after inch of the land that supports our magnificent city. The underground springs that once provided fresh water begin to taste increasingly of salt, as the ocean intrudes into aquifers that sustained us since the city's founding. The harbor, that has been our greatest asset, gradually becomes our greatest threat, as rising waters overwhelm the engineering works that once seemed capable of holding back any natural force. Future generations will discover our remains accidentally, diving in waters where they expect to find only empty seafloor. They will marvel at the size and sophistication of our construction, puzzling over how such massive stones were moved and positioned with such precision. They will photograph our statues and artifacts, creating images that will circulate around their world faster than any merchant ship ever carried news in our time. They will study our inscriptions and records, trying to understand how we lived and worked and worshipped in this place where now only fish and seaweed mark the passage of time. Perhaps they will even recognize something of themselves in our struggles, seeing in our daily labors the same basic human needs and desires that drive their own more comfortable existence. Perhaps they will understand that the convenience and ease of their lives rests upon foundations laid by countless generations of people who knew that every comfort must be earned through honest work and every tradition maintained through constant vigilance. The sun climbs higher now, beginning another cycle of heat and light that will test human endurance in all the familiar ways. My body, somehow still functioning despite exhaustion that should have ended my usefulness hours ago, prepares to meet whatever challenges this new day will bring. The eternal flame burns, steady and bright, symbol of persistence that continues regardless of individual frailty or the passage of earthly time. The temple doors stand open to welcome another day of pilgrims and petitioners, merchants and students, all seeking something that only this sacred place can provide. And I take my position once again, ready to serve as I have served for so many years, as faithful servants have served in this place since memory began. The work continues, as it must, as it always has, as it always will, until the final servant completes the final task, and the sea claims what the sea will claim. But that ending, when it comes, will mark not failure, but completion, not defeat, but transformation. The city will sink, but its spirit will rise. The buildings will crumble, but their purpose will endure. The people will pass away, but their example will inspire others to similar dedication and service. And somewhere, in some other time and place, other hands will light similar lamps, other voices will sing similar prayers. Other hearts will dedicate themselves to preserving and protecting what matters most in human existence. The cycle continues, as eternal as the rising and setting of the sun, as persistent as the flowing of the Nile, as enduring as the love that motivates ordinary people to extraordinary service. Rest now, dear dreamer, in the knowledge that such dedication continues, even in your comfortable world, though you may not see it clearly. Sleep peacefully, knowing that others maintain the watch while you recover your strength for tomorrow's challenges. And dream, if you will, of golden lamps burning steadily through the darkness, of faithful servants keeping vigil through the long night hours, of ancient wisdom preserved through careful labor by those who understand that some things are worth any sacrifice to maintain. And so, dear dreamer, as the echoes of history fade and the quiet of the night settles in, may your mind find peace and your dreams take you to places even time cannot touch. Until next time, sleep well and dream deeply.